conversation with Joy from the FPIES Foundation. Joy and I have known each other for several years now, as I am a big supporter of the FPIES Foundation and the work that they are doing. And Joy has even donated some of her time to help with the Free to Feed Masterclass in the past. To help families who are navigating this and understand the nuances of FPIES and help with outreach and education. So Joy, it is a privilege to get to speak with you today. And so to start out, I would love to hear more about your background. Tell us about your journey that led to the founding of the FPIES Foundation.
Oh, thank you, Trill. First, the privilege is it's mine because I love the work that you do. I think it's so important, especially in our community and in this space, and supporting not just breastfeeding but feeding in general. And so my background is in nutrition, so it's kind of a cornerstone, and speaks to my heart. My journey started with FPIES, I guess 13 years ago now, because my son is 13, and he was born fourth of our four boys, so not nothing out of the realm of his birth story necessarily. He had some milk protein intolerance right from the get-go, but my other boys did, so we just kind of were like, okay, yep, this is where we're at. Tried some, I was nursing him, and tried some soy formula. I did work part-time, so I wanted to have a backup to my backup stash, or my husband wanted a backup. And then the soy formula went bad. And so then that's when we kind of were like, this is something a little bit different. What's going on? He sure throws up a lot more than my other kids. His vomit hits the wall, on the other side of the room. This is a little bit different. I wonder what we're dealing with here, kind of thing. But he was growing and gaining until we tried the soy formula. So it wasn't a huge concern. We just thought, yep, he's got something more. My oldest son, who's now 22, definitely had more than just milk protein allergy, but we think he probably had FPIES too. But 22 years ago, all they could say was milk. And they said, maybe soy, meh, you could try a few things, meh, nobody really wanted to support us. He puked every single day of his life until he was 16, 18 months old. So we just dealt with it. We just, it wasn't as forceful or as scary as our youngest sons were getting to be. And so then when we started solids, we noticed things just kept getting worse. So we thought, okay, we're dealing with something anatomical, so then we started with the visits with the specialists and bringing our pediatrician on board and saying, okay, this is now out of my experience. This is more than what I've dealt with my other kids. What could be going on here? So then we started down that road. Nobody in the hospital, the clinic that we were at, had ever heard of FPIES. So it wasn't on anybody's radar. I was frantically searching in all the medical journals, trying to find, something similar to what he was going through. Somebody else, I didn't think we were completely alone. I just thought I just hadn't found it yet. And so my pediatrician was working with us too. And so then, we kind of thought we stumbled upon something that might match it. One of my colleagues, a dietitian, came and said, hey, I have this article, that sounds a lot like what he's going through. And so then we started down that path. And then we looked for places where there might be somebody already familiar with it, and went and saw a provider there. And then they said within 5 minutes, they were like, oh yeah, he has FPIES. And his biggest trigger is corn. And so and we were like, that's what we were thinking, but okay, well, what do we do now? So then by then I had stopped nursing. They had said, we had done a scope, and they had said, oh, he's definitely got so much inflammation in there. He's reacting to, you're not even going to be able to figure out what in your breast milk. So just stop breastfeeding him and give him formula. And by then he had already lost weight with soy, and being nutrition in my background, I just said, you know what, if that's what he needs, then that's what I'm going to do. And unfortunately, he got sicker on the formula. So he was that kid of like, oh, wait, that didn't help. Now I wish I could go backwards, kind of thing. But I mean, I didn't dwell on that, because that's not necessarily healthy either. without stopping formula, I don't know if I would have figured out corn, because that was hard enough to figure out with stopping breast milk. With It was hard to figure out just with formula. So I don't know if I would have figured it out with breast milk. I do know that I said many times, and I think I wrote it on my blog many times, that I sure wish there was something I could test my breast milk with. And mine was more of, because I know he's reacting to my breast milk, and if I test my breast milk and there's whole proteins in my breast milk, I'll be able to figure out what he's allergic to. So like, not as like knowing his allergens and then being able to see if they're in the breast milk, but using the breast milk as a tool to say, oh, these are the ones that my body is not processing properly for whatever reason. Because just in my own knowledge, that's kind of what I already knew in my heart, to, like, this is what's happening. Clearly, I'm not processing this protein well enough for his body. But I mean, it turns out he was chronically sick while on breast milk, but thriving. Whereas once we stopped breast milk, those good qualities of breast milk weren't there to keep his body in check and in balance. So, I'm so glad when I hear people are able to figure out, what their babies can tolerate and still breastfeed. But I also know what it feels like to have a child that's so allergic that you have to look at other options, because fed is best. So that's I've been in all spectrums of that field, including him not being able to tolerate formula, and him having to be on TPN and feeding tubes and blenderized feeds, and whatever it took to put nutrition in his body. So we went through all of it. Um, so in that, it took us so many months to find the diagnosis, and then I was in a support group right around the time we figured out that maybe this was the diagnosis. That's when I said, okay, well, now let me see who else is out there. So then I searched for the support groups, and some of my searches had started to match this support group on Baby Center, but I didn't allow myself to go into it. I thought, nope, I want to stay peripheral. I want to figure this out scientifically before I go into the support groups, to make sure I belong there and don't start trying something that wouldn't work for him. And then once it was clear and I went in there, and then it was like, just, oh my gosh, everybody here has the same story, and then me and a couple of other moms started to notice, wait, everybody has the same story. We're telling everybody the same thing for the beginning pieces. Like, this is what you need, just this and this and this. And not that everybody's way of dealing with it is the same, or everybody's child has the same triggers, but there are definitely some commonalities and tools that we can use and share. And so if you have at least those to start with, the load feels a little bit less heavy. And I'm all about empowering people to do what they can for themselves. And so, hey, this is the pieces that you can take care of. These are the pieces that you need to take to your provider. These are the pieces that your family can help with, and and so far. So, and these are the pieces that we still don't know anything about, kind of thing. So from there, we recognize the need, the high need, to have this information in one location. And that was kind of the driving force of like, okay, let's put this on a website. And then as we started to develop it, and we started to realize, yeah, I think we're going to need, a medical advisory in order to really help people, and to help their providers. Because I mean, even for us, the providers that we had seen, they were clueless too. They didn't know, but they wanted to know. So, they wanted to learn too. I mean, there are some that don't want to learn, but there are many that want to learn. And so we're like, well, we could help them too. And so from being being a healthcare professional myself, being on that side of the door, I thought, well, we have to do this right. And so then that's when we decided to make it into a foundation and a 501c3, and have a medical advisory board, and kind of concentrate on both sides of the door as much as possible. But first and foremost, giving everybody those tools that they need for every day, for today, because that's the reality of it. There's great things in research, and there's great things in finding out, next steps and treatments and all that. And all that stuff comes. In the meantime, you're raising a baby, you're raising a child, you need help today. And so that's kind of where we have kept our focus. Is that that's in a nutshell?
Yeah, that's perfect. That is perfect. And I obviously relate so much to having a personal story attached to the work that I'm currently doing, having navigated this with both of my daughters. And I think it's fascinating and also I'm sure bittersweet. I'm sure you could probably relate to this too, that like that it was necessary for us to go out and build the thing that didn't exist yet. So it feels very bittersweet to me, right? Like this, like, yeah, I get to do something that's so incredibly fulfilling for me, but also I hate that it's necessary, if that makes sense.
Right, right.
So when you started the
Exactly,
Foundation,
exactly.
FPIES didn't, I know there was research, right? There was research around a perfusive vomiting response and things like that in the older literature, but my understanding is that there wasn't, at least in the US, yet an official diagnostic code and criteria yet, right?
Right, right. Yeah. There was, well, the very first time that I searched it, I could get to the end of Google, before they start, now it's 25 pages easily, before you have to, and then it starts to, but it was one page, 12 articles existed when I first came across it. So, and they were just, they were more, the observational um, articles. So they were, hey, I've got this, I've had 3 kids, this, Dr. Shisher, Dr. Powell, there was some, it had started to be described in the 70s and 80s and I think 60s, late 60s even. But it really, it was thought to be so rare. And so it really nobody had connected anything. People thought they were just dealing with it, you know, in their own unique clinics and whatnot. So that's what also where we said, okay, we need to raise a little ruckus here because, when I joined Baby Center support group, I was number 69, so still less than 100. I just very much remember like, wow, this is really rare. But within a year, I was like, there was over 400, and I thought, wait, this is really growing. And, the internet, of course, being, 2010, 2011, a lot more people finding things online. That definitely, more people finding the support group is contributing, but it's just increasing um, in numbers, just like other allergies are. I mean, it's definitely on the rise, and we don't know why.
Yep, I totally agree. And yeah, that's what's interesting. And I get that question a lot of like the why. And I wish we had a simple, succinct answer to that. But I think it's a combination and there's lots of theories, right? And I think it's likely a combination of these theories. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into your journey with your youngest, especially because one of the really common things that the families that we work with talk about is they often get told that it's not possible to react to these hypoallergenic formulas that are corn-based. And it sounds like because your youngest had a very severe corn reactivity, that's not the case in his journey. So can you tell me more about I'm assuming it was a corn-based formula that you went to when we ended up in the realm of failure to thrive, essentially.
Right, right. He initially, so we tried my other son's. He's definitely unique in that he reacts to formula, but he's not alone. I mean, so it doesn't. It's not common to react to formula, but it does happen. And then there is. So I kind of want to say that across the top because of course people get very scared, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have formula as an option, and that was our case. We did not have it as an option. And it was scary. But I do have a nutrition background, and so that was felt to be like, okay, at least I knew what I was sort of doing. I mean, I knew what I was doing, but it's still, I would have liked a little more help with it, but I would have liked to have something to feed him and not have to be his dietetic technician, and his mom. But so we tried initially. just the over the counter, Carnation Good Start or something, because that's what, we thought, well, some broken down proteins, gentle proteins or whatever, just to see if it's something that's causing his stomach to be upset. And so it was 2 times of that. And it's one of those things where it's just etched in your brain. I can remember where I was sitting. I can remember how the vomit hit the other side of the wall. Because you just put yourself in your brain, go, well, that was different. I've had 4 kids and they've all vomited, and nobody's hit the wall, 8 feet away, So then I was like, what would have caused that to be that projectile? But just kind of like, okay, that was him. And then so we tried it again 2 weeks later. These are like half an ounce because he didn't want to drink it. And so then again, same reaction. And I thought, well, okay, he's definitely allergic to milk. And then we just pulled everything back. I stopped eating milk. Um, and then he seemed to be okay. And then we started the soy formula. And that one, he didn't have vomit. He got very congested. He just would kind of just was blah all the time. And then he looked like he was losing weight. Like it's kind of easy to see on a baby. And so he did. He dropped from 80th to 30th percentile in 2 weeks. So he lost a lot of weight. And I mean, it's not a lot for, but but if of his percentage of his weight, it's a lot. And so then that's when we said, okay, well, we're not going to do any formulas for a while. And then that's when he started having testing. And then they said, yep, he's definitely reacting to something in your milk. So stop nursing him and try this formula and try this PPI. And our pediatrician knew that I was conservative in, medication management. And so I said, do we really have to make 2 changes at once? Do we PPI and an elemental and stop feeding him formula and give him this elemental formula? And she agreed. She said, let's just make one change. Let's start with the formula. He needs nutrition. He's reacting to your breast milk. Let's start with that. See if maybe that solves the need for a PPI. And so, it was like a Thursday, Friday, and we started the formula, and he absolutely refused to drink it. He wouldn't even take, no spoon, no on the finger, no droplet, no nothing. And so, and he was
Happy
getting,
to all the things.
yeah, or like, and of course, I'm like, the milk is right here for him in me, and I can't give it to him. And so then we gave him some Pedialyte over the weekend, some unflavored, um, I think it might have even been generic, but Pedialyte. And he was tired but happy. And it was very weird. We were like, something's not right here. Why would he be better without food? And so that was the first times where we were like, huh, he's refusing the formula, and he's getting sick off of milk. And so then by Monday, he was pretty, he was hungry, and so he was starting to get mad. And so then they said, yep, bring him in and we'll admit him and start doing tests. And then I broke down and nursed him because I couldn't. He was starving, when your baby's hungry, and he was so hungry. And I nursed him, and of course then he was happy for 2 hours, 3 hours. And as we were checking in, he started his whole climbing up your shoulder, screaming bloody murder. Everybody stops in their tracks and is like, what is wrong with that kid? And that's when I knew in my heart, like, yep, there's definitely something in my milk that is hurting him. And so then I felt much better about, going to this formula. And in the hospital, then they did some techniques and helped us get him to take it. And of course, he vomited all over the hospital room. And there was somebody in the room. She was, I think, play therapist. And even she was like, I have 3 kids. I've never seen vomit like that. Should I get somebody? And I'm like, this is how he vomits. I'm not scared. No. And we're here. So I guess tell somebody he puked. Yeah. And, so they came and cleaned up his bed, his sheets, the wall, the floor, everything. And they were like, oh, that's probably from, all the excitement, and he was crying, and, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll see. And so he kept vomiting. And then they're like, oh, but he's keeping, he gained, you know, zero point 0.2 ounces or something like that. Yeah, well, he was dehydrated when we checked him in. So of course he gained, but it was enough. And, go home here, give him this formula. And I'll refrain from saying the brand of formula, but it was an elemental formula. It just happened to be what the hospital, was their brand that they used. Um, and he vomited it so badly all over. The acid stains are still on our car because it was so acidic. And that's what I noted about it. I was like, is this the formula or his stomach acid? It is so acidic. And so he just kept vomiting, kept vomiting, kept vomiting. And they're like, just give it a couple of days, couple more days, couple more days. And so after 2 or 3 weeks, we said, could we maybe try a different elemental formula at least? There are other ones out there. Being with my nutrition background, I was like, there's something in this formula. If he's reacting to everything in my breast milk, why wouldn't he react to something in this formula? There are ingredients on the back of this formula. And they said, we don't think so, but okay, fine. If you want to switch, you can switch. And so then with that formula, the vomiting wasn't as acidic, and it slowed down. So we would get like 2 or 3 days, but then it was more like he would pass out. And we're just like, okay, why is he passing out now? Because before he was compensating fairly quickly. He was vomiting, but then like, oh, okay, that felt better, and he would pop out of it. But now he's passing out, and we're like, this is the strangest thing. So then they thought, oh, let's try, I'm not sure what it's called now, but it's a cereal type formula. At the time it was called, oh, and now I forget. But it was, I think, right, I think it's rice based now, but it was corn syrup, corn solids based then, cornstarch. And that's when the vomiting was disturbing. And we were like, okay, this is the same ingredients as the formula with cornstarch. And so then, I started to ask some of my dietitian colleagues, I'm like, people can be allergic to corn, right? I mean, this is crazy. Everybody's saying you can't possibly react to this, but he is. It is the only thing he is getting. He is reacting to it. And, no, of course the dietitians were like, of course they can. Of course he can. I said, well, why do they make formulas with corn syrup then? What the heck, And so, well, it's very broken down and he shouldn't react to it, but he could. And so then we started to notice, of course, I was journaling like crazy. And I started to notice that, anytime he took more than, 21 ounces, those are the days that he vomited, so he had a threshold that he could tolerate. So I thought, okay, well, he needs the formula for the vitamins. Maybe he can have something else. We need to just move forward. We're just so stuck with this formula. We can't even get him to tolerate the formula, much less any foods. And now he's nearing a year. And, so now that's around a year is when we had went and got his diagnosis from somebody who knew. And I said he reacts to the formula, he reacts to Tylenol, he reacts to, and I said 3 or 4 things, and he's like, yep, I had a kid like him once, and he reacted to the same things, and he has a corn trigger. And I'm like, okay, well, how do we feed him? And he said, find him a protein, find him a vegetable, find him a starch, find him a fruit, and then don't move. And just stay that way till his system calms down. And of course, the dietetics in me said, oh, he needs more than that. So I tried to find him tried to build him a formula because we tried hemp milk, which worked very well for him. But it was so skim, it was so watery. So he needed so much of it to even get half of the calories that he needed. So I said, well, he needs a starch in this, and then he needs an oil. And then once he has that, then I'll find him, a vegetable and a fruit. And so he started reacting to the components that I was giving him in that. And then he had such a bad reaction to a starch that I tried to put into it that he went into acidosis, and we ended up emergently admitting him. And then they did a scope, and they found out that he had ulcers, what I was told were equivalent to children who were being starved to death from third world country. He had been on hemp milk for 3 days. It was not the hemp milk. That's the same as the Pedialyte. I mean, he was getting more nutrition than the Pedialyte that they were okay with, you know. So it was the months of the elemental formula only diet that he was reacting to, and he had so much inflammation that it was from, you know, it was from that, but nobody wanted to believe it was from that, and then it was just this constant. We went months and months and months, year and a half of a yo-yo of, well, he needs this nutrition. Every time I give him this nutrition, he reacts to it, you know. So it every time I give him a new food, he reacts, and then he has inflammation, and then he malabsorbs, and then we don't have nutrition. So it was a constant seesaw until we found him found him a tiny menu. And he went on TPN for a little while, and then and then he got his G tube. And after he got his G tube, I blenderized his safe foods, his tiny menu, and whether or not he ate them or not, he got his nutrition. And then we really never looked back. We just we, you know, took breaks when we needed to, introduced foods, you know, that worked for him, that worked for the feeds, you know, found him enough foods, and then just concentrated on him and his development and being a little boy. And the G tube gave us that freedom. But it was, yeah, again, like you said, bittersweet that we had to get to that. You know, that was a hard day when they said, okay, you know, maybe he would benefit from a G tube, but we don't know if it'll help him or not. And so you have to sign your kid up for surgery, not knowing if it's going to help him or not. So, what started me on that? I feel like that was a long answer to some question.
I would love to pause for just a second and ask, for anyone who's listening who isn't familiar, can you describe more of what the TPN and a G-tube is?
TPN stands for Total Parenteral Nutrition, and that means that his nutrition is given to him in IV form straight into his blood. So he had a catheter into his vein that gave him his nutrition. And then a G tube is a gastrostomy tube. So it's a tube surgically implanted into his stomach that food and formula can be given to. Usually it's formula. Historically, it's been formula, but in the past several years, it's increasing in ability to do blenderized foods. And we did blenderized foods that I blended myself. But there are products out there now that are blenderized foods that are equivalent to the formulas.
And the goal, from my understanding, is to essentially bypass where the reactivity is occurring, right? So like bypassing the system that would cause the vomiting.
No, well, for TPN, the theory is that yes, for gut rest, he needed gut rest. At the time that they put him on TPN, he needed gut rest, and the first time he went on TPN was after they realized that yes, the formulas are probably causing a problem. The corn formulas. There's a soy formula that was carbohydrate free for kids that needed a carbohydrate free formula, a different type of diagnosis, but crossover to fit him. And so they thought, okay, if he could tolerate soy, going back to when he had it, he didn't have vomiting, so let's figure out what it is that he has problems with soy, and see if that. And so we did an in-hospital trial where they scoped him right before, did an upper endoscopy to visualize what he looked like, and pulled samples of his intestines to see if he had any inflammation, and he was clean. And then we gave him the soy formula, and then they did a repeat scope after a few days, and he had inflammation. And he had more than just inflammation, he had villi damage. So the finger-like projections in his intestine that absorb nutrients were starting to flatten. They were inflamed and reacting to the soy. So we knew then that that's what his issue with soy was, and his GI, that scared her. And so she said, let's just put him on some temporary IV nutrition, give his gut rest, and give his body, because you need all these extra calories to rebuild those villi. and as a baby, and a baby who didn't have, adequate nutrition. So we lived in the hospital for 5 weeks for that one while he had a line placed in his arm, and got TPN for 12 hours. Actually, I think it was 15 or 18 hours that time a day. And then that calmed down that inflammation. We went home and continued on. And then later, he ended up on TPN for 8 months. He developed vitamin C deficiency. He had a safe source of vitamin C, peaches, but he reacted to a dish that they were served on once, and then he stopped eating them. And within, I didn't have a ton of vitamin C because that was his only source. So he developed scurvy, like pirates. It was very scary. It's not, that's a nervous laugh because it was very scary for him to go through that. And so at the time, there was a shortage of vitamin C. And the only way to give it to him was IV. And so they said, well, if we're going to put a line in, let's just give him TPN and let his gut rest, because we're just not making progress. We're 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, with foods. And so they said, let's let his gut rest, let him rest. Let's give him his hemp milk that's safe for him and nothing else. And let's see how he does. And so that helped him. His system he didn't fully tolerate the TPN, but we don't really know why. It fed his brain, and we got through it. But it became obvious that, well, we didn't want his gut to forget how to function, and we knew we needed to get him on food. So then we transitioned him to the G tube, the gastrostomy tube in his stomach. The G tube does not bypass. The only thing it bypasses is the eating, and you do have digestive enzymes in your mouth that start to digest and break down food. So there were things that you can't put in a G tube, in a blenderized feed, or we couldn't put very starchy things because it is missing the saliva to break it down, and his body, it was just causing gas and dumping and that kind of thing. But yeah, it makes trials a little bit easier because they can be very intentional and very measured and whatnot, but not safer or different in any other way as far as reactivity to those proteins, because the system is still going to react. But we got to where we would do trials with his tube. We would let him know, hey, we're doing this trial today. It's going to be in your feed, and then we'll see how things go. And that freed him from having to think about eating it or reacting to it. So that helped him psychologically, but it didn't change if his body was going to react to it. So that was just another benefit of having the G tube for him.
Got it. That makes sense. And taking we're going through and then kind of backing up into the journey. And so I want to do that one more time, or at least one more time. I won't make any promises. When you were in the beginning trenches of this and navigating the information that you were told, you're not going to be able to keep nursing. It's something in your breast milk that's eliciting this response. Two things that I think are really helpful for those listening is one, to understand if anyone is unfamiliar, that there are different levels of formula, right? And so there's the regular formula, and then, as you mentioned, kind of more the gentle, which is often referred to as a hydrolyzed formula. So you'll see hydrolyzed on the ingredient deck, often next to the ingredient that they hydrolyze. And that takes the whole version of the protein and it breaks it down to smaller portions, right? So it breaks it up into smaller pieces. And then you have the elemental, and the other name for that is an amino acid-based formula, where we take those portions and we break it down all the way to the individual amino acid. So that's the goal of the elemental formula. And so essentially, Joy, what you mentioned is kind of taking that path right down to the elemental.
Right.
It is true that a vast majority of children, even if there is, a corn sensitivity issue, that they'll be able to tolerate that particular style because it's broken down so incredibly much. However, as you experienced, and as I can say with the thousands of families that we've worked with, that's not a given. So it is possible to react to these very small portions of the corn protein broken down in these hydrolyzed formula. And we also experience some families who have issues with the oils that are made, created with these formulas, right? The coconut oils, the soy oils, things of that accord. And so it can be so incredibly disheartening to hear then like that's not possible, right? To like physically see your baby reactive to something and then be told like that's not a thing. It's
The reality, right?
like you're crazy, right? It make you feel like I saw it with my own eyeballs. And so I want to mention that like, well, no, it's not common for that to be an occurrence. It absolutely does happen. And so typically for anyone who's like in the more beginning of their journey, one thing that we always mention is that if you're in the midst of navigating trials with formula, which we work with tons of families that do that, of course, if you have the option to continue pumping during that time, right? So that you can continue to keep your supply in the worst case scenario. And of course, we hope this doesn't happen, but if you have to, you can go back to nursing, to your breastfeeding journey. And it's not easy. And so like, I definitely don't say that with any kind of lightheartedness as somebody who, pumped like a mad woman for weeks while we were on a formula. Not easy, incredibly hard. And we'll also say very valuable though, for those families who are like, oh my gosh, we have failed all of these formulas. While not common, can happen. And then we can say, okay, is breastfeeding still an option? What can we do about it? Because as you mentioned, yes, we had reactivity. It sounds like in your journey with your youngest, there was absolutely reactivity likely to corn through your breast. However, you weren't at such a heightened state of reactivity as you were when he started getting that corn directly, right? Which in the new research that we have likely is because the way that you're breaking down those proteins is different than the way they're broken down in the formula, right? And the combination between differently and the fact that you are providing other things such as antibodies and
anti-inflammatory properties
and cytokines, right? There's so much there in your breastfeeding journey and in your human milk that you found some kind of balance, right? And not a great balance, right? Because we're still dealing with reactivity, but a different balance, I guess, than once we got into the realm of giving it directly. And that's not uncommon that we see that with families too. And that can be confusing to parents when they say like, when I eat a piece of cheese, this happens, but then I give it to baby and like, holy moly, this really big response. And that's being the difference between baby getting it directly versus you consuming it and it transferring through your body. So I think that was really helpful as you described what was going on in your journey. One, to mention that, the number one thing, if you can, being to continue to pump in case you end up in your situation, God forbid, and then that absolutely that's possible, right? That's unfortunately a possibility. And yes, we're getting more formulas and options, and that's great and wonderful. Unfortunately, though, we're still lackluster at best. And right now, I would say it's even more devastating for our community because of the formula shortage in the United States.
Shortages. Yeah.
It's devastating. It's to the point where we have families where there's only one option for them. And if they can't find it, then you're in the realm of, I have to give my baby something.
Right. And then, never mind how expensive the formulas are too. So, if there's a way to continue nursing that can help with that financial, there are people that sell their house, move to different states, that have different insurance coverages, change jobs, all these things just to afford this formula. It's so crazy that these the medically necessary nutrition has to cost, is so cost prohibitive. But so a couple things that I wanted to, well, one, I knew I wasn't going to forget. I should have written it down. Two, something about the breast milk. One is, ironically, the necklace that you're wearing. There was a doctor that described it. So the difference of the formulas is so a pearl necklace. I don't know if that's an actual pearl, but the pearl. To give a visual, a regular formula is like a pearl necklace that's all attached, and all the proteins are all there. And then the hydrolyzed is it's broken up into 2 or 3 clumps. The pearls are still, there's a few pearls that are still together. And the elemental is they're all separated. They're all broken up. They're all by themselves. And so then the body, and that's the way the body recognizes to you, or why not just recognizes, but utilizes those proteins in their amino acid form. And so those elemental formula, as you were talking about TPN and G-tubes, I realized I kept saying elemental formula, which is also the term for amino acid formula. They're the same, a synonymous term. Amino acid means that they're broken down into those single amino acids from the protein, which of course And I've seen your graphics on your Instagram and stuff, which are great to give that visual. Because like you said, it is a stepwise process. If your baby's reacting, they want you to try the first formula and then maybe the hydrolyzed and probably the hydrolyzed, and then get to the elemental, partly because ease of access. If your baby can tolerate the hydrolyzed, then great, because it's more accessible and it's more affordable. But also because of the cost of it, and because we just want to know if they can tolerate that. But so those are kind of things that you can expect to go through, and aren't bad. Nobody's telling you, to feed your baby something that they're going to react to, because you don't know. The even One of the things I was going to say about breast milk is, even if you're going to continue nursing, sometimes it can be a common unknown to say. There's a couple of different categories. One is to say, oh, babies can't possibly react to breast milk, which we know that they can, but there are some doctors that still think that they can't. Well, no, they're not reacting to your actual milk, as in a human milk allergy. They are reacting to proteins that are being passed through your milk. Why? The science is coming forward, but is still, not quite there to say exactly why your body doesn't break down, or why your child recognizes those proteins, or those not broken down proteins. So they can absolutely react, but will they react to every single trigger? No. So sometimes they might react to the milk that they reacted to, but not the carrots, or whichever. So that to say that you have to give up everything that your baby reacts to isn't accurate either. So you kind of, just like you have to go through the process of, will they tolerate this formula, this formula, this formula, you kind of have to go through that with breast milk as well. And that doesn't mean you start on a 2-food elimination diet. It means you pull out what you think, and you go from there. Breast milk test strips would be amazing to have to help with that tool, so that you're not starving in this process. But you have to. It is a lot of detective work, and it's a lot of intuitive work. I think parents need to be more empowered, that their intuition can guide them. I mean, we are given that intuition as mothers. We are connected to our children in those ways, whether we birthed them or not. We are caring for them, and we are connected to them, and we can tell what they need. That's part of that bond that we create. Nursing, formula feeding, birth parents, not just caregivers of those children. There is that bond that's there that connects us. And so if you feel like something is, that you're trying to figure something out and everything is adding up, then that's where you can focus your attention. It doesn't mean that it's definitive. It's just a clue. Your intuition can be a clue for you to help figure things out. It is possible to figure out what your baby is reacting to. And then there are possibilities that, like we said, that the components in the breast milk, that they might still be reacting, but the anti-inflammatory properties of the breast milk might give them that balance to where the nutrition is more important. And so you're taking, I hate to say lesser of two evils, because that's not exactly the right term, but you're balancing it in that way, because of what breast milk can provide. But on the formula side, there are other formula options too. So not to, we were told, oh, if he reacts to this one, he'll react to all. And that's just not true. We did tolerate one better. There are more formulas now, than there were then. There are some that are developed to be corn, not have corn ingredients. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to say. Sorry, I'm babbling, but another big piece that I learned, because I paid attention since we went through it, and with my nutrition background, similar to how you're using your background to be like, I know this, let's build from there, investigate this. Something that it didn't hold true for my son, and there are kids that it doesn't also, but there are many kids that it worked for, is that when their gut is inflamed and they switch from regular formula to hydrolyzed or elemental formula, or they switch from breast milk where they were reacting to an elemental formula, and it doesn't get better immediately, but each day there's a small change, then there's a reassurance that it will get better. That when the gut is inflamed, of course it's reacting to everything. If that gut can heal, then it won't react to those trace proteins or those leftover proteins that are theoretically on the starches and oils in the formula. That's my theory of why our kids react to it, but maybe our kids react to starches and oils too. I don't know. We don't know about the mechanisms of FPIES, so maybe there is a different component there. It's in the digestion or something else. But the theory that I see with kids is that their gut is so inflamed, so of course those open junctures are there, letting in the allergens, and the body's just doing what it's thinking that it needs to do, and it's trying to get that trigger out. And so the more nutrition, the more that heals that, the less they'll react to it. So minute changes in the right direction are a good thing. Our son was going in the wrong direction, so the corn just kept triggering him, and he was just so sensitive to it. We don't know why, and I don't know if I'll ever know why. Just was the way he was.
Yep. I love what you mentioned about those like day-to-day small improvements, which is exactly right. And so one, on the like oils part of things, there is a more recent FDA publication from an independent science group that actually found protein fragments in the oils. And so I think that probably partially answers that question, right? Maybe not entirely, but it answers kind of a big question for a lot of us of like, what is happening? And so they are finding these protein fragments, and really small, right? And I love your example of the pearl necklace, because that's my thing, so that's perfect. I like to use the alphabet as an example. But pearl necklace is perfect too. And so that's one. And then two, as it relates to that improvement, yes, 100%. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes from, is that like with these reactions, there is the reaction itself, and then there's healing time, right? And I think there's a lot of confusion around the two, and especially as it relates to your breastfeeding relationship, because you'll hear either, proteins, you don't transfer nothing in your breast milk can cause this reaction, or the like weird polar opposite of that, of
everything.
It's in there forever and ever. Amen. When you eat something, it's in your breast for a really long time. And so what that causes then, I think, as we're looking at the healing time day over day, is that in our minds and in the minds of providers, that means that like slowly we're reducing the amount of corn in your breast day over day, when in actuality it's simply healing day over day. Your breast is clear of the protein that you've eaten the next day, and now you need healing. And so absolutely agree with you 100% that things shouldn't get worse once you have you're past your typical like reactivity timing, right? And depending on the person and the type of reaction, that can be immediately, that can be up to 48 hours later, depending on the type of reaction. So once you're past that window of time of activity for you, day to day, maybe not diaper to diaper, maybe not feed to feed, but day over day, at the end of the day, it should be a little bit better. Minute changes day over day, and that's how we
definitely recognize that
Yep.
in
Yep.
other, in other people's stories and how things went. And it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense when you heal, when you're providing nutrition, then you're healing past reactions. If and so it's just as long as that trigger isn't still there. Um, and sometimes even if it's there, because I've guided other families through the corn. They're like, we know he reacts to corn. They reacted to it this way, this way, this way, this way, and it's in the formula. And so they're, like I said, they're reacting, but it's the reaction. The gap gets wider. The reaction is less as the gut heals, and they're still, the body's still recognizing the corn, but it's not attacking it. So it's still, potential. Everybody's different in how that body handles it, but it's still it providing nutrition, and nutrition, is obviously the most important piece, for growth and development and everything, everything. So, then sometimes you just have to say, okay, this is the best that we're going to be, and stay there for a little while, knowing that we can reevaluate, as time goes on. Because I think that's a big thing too, is that people say, well, this is the way it is, and nobody's ever going to look at it again. And it just kind of, with this diagnosis, especially since it's outgrown, clearly something's happening with their immune system maturation, with the gut, something is happening behind the scenes, regardless of what we're doing with nutrition. So something is definitely going to be happening with nutrition. So just that constant reevaluating, if things are not going well, to just say, let's just stay for a little while. Gut rest is huge, for our families. So, um, to know that too, to be reassured that, sometimes helps a lot too. That just stay where you're at for a little while and let that gut kind of heal, and then the body can behave more appropriately.
Yep. And I'd love to quickly touch on the psychological side of things, because you mentioned a few times about feeding aversions, and that's near and dear to my heart, because outside of like active reactivity with my children, the hardest thing that I think I've ever experienced in my life is feeding aversions, because you have this tiny little human who you love with every piece of your soul, and they're hungry and you want to feed them and they do not want to eat. And feeding aversions like have just ruined the amount of ugly crying I have done over feeding aversions is intense. And
Yes,
when you're
the
nursing,
deflating feelings of
yeah,
not
when you're
being
trying to
able to
bottle
feed your
feed, all of
child.
those things. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, even if it's, you know, if it's a mantra, if it's thoughts on like, navigating feeding aversions when you're in the trenches. It's so hard.
It is so hard. And we're trying, it's funny that you mention it, because we are actively working on, um, finding ways to, to help providers help families with that. Raise awareness to families in general, that this can happen, and to be on the lookout for it. But at the same time, you don't want to scare people to say you will have feeding aversions,
Well, it's
um,
gonna get better.
or just because they yeah, or just because they start to have feeding aversions, that they'll hang on to them. My son had some fairly significant feeding aversions, and he has zero feeding aversions right now. So they do get better, so it's like this some of them just dissolved. Like, and I mean, we had some pretty significant ones. So, that we went through the different stages of them and the different avenues of them. He was in play therapy. Um, so different things that, can be done. The likelihood of having a feeding aversion when you are having to, I don't like the word restrict, modify the diet, um, the is high. It's, I mean, the
It would be weird.
children need to learn to right, exactly. It's a developmental stage that they're going through, and we're chunking it out. It's different. So whether or not they don't have any practice chewing because they're only on breast milk, out of necessity past 6 months, or whether or not they've had a reaction and they don't want to have another reaction, so they refuse anything from a spoon, or whatever the reason, there's going to be gaps in that normal time of when typical time of when they should have that practice. And so something in the community that a lot of moms just come around and help new moms is saying, find ways to present a safe food. So, find at least one other way to present a safe food, if not five other ways. So frozen, baked, broiled, cut up in pieces, whatever, including breast milk. Breast milk can be made into, we made hemp milk, but into little frozen dots. And then my son could pick them up. I mean, they melted fairly fast, but he was, his tiny fingers and pincer grasp and picking them up and mouthing them, and then they melted. But still, some other way to present that. We made milkshakes out of them, not with milk, with what his safe milk was. We made popsicles so he could hold it, So, and then we just kind of, every food that we added, we've tried to add some different, so purees. So you have frozen peaches. So then you have pureed peaches to frozen peaches to leather peaches to now we have a little grain. So now we can combine that with a little oil, and we have a little tiny cookie. And so we practiced all those things, and we still had feeding aversions. So we recognized it. I did what I could, and he still had some issues. So we tried just to know that everything that you can do, it's still good to keep a provider involved and say, a dietitian is a great go-between for that. A pediatrician also is educated to recognize those signs. And so like I said, what we had was play therapy, and his wasn't necessarily feeding therapy because he didn't have foods to practice with. But they taught us about how all of their senses are connected. And so he had some proprioception issues. He had other stuff because his feeding wasn't being used. Or he was overstimulated to smells, and he was understimulated to touch because he was aversive. And, so then we had play therapy where he swang on a swing and played a game, and so different things that I wouldn't have ever even thought about. So definitely finding and utilizing those resources, because they're out there, and I think that they helped him with that too. But going back to a little bit out of my story and back to the foundation is that we are working, look to somewhere in the near future, we're running a survey about difficulties with feeding, because we recognize that some kids have, like we said, lots of aversions and significant issues, and some kids have just a little bit, but they all need help. This is not normal. This is not typical. This is not, this isn't, it shouldn't be, it should be recognized. It shouldn't be ignored. It shouldn't be brushed under the rug. This is a difficulty families deal with every single day. And when you have 3 meals a day and snacks, and it's exhausting when that's a fight for it feels like a fight for everything. And it can be very deflating. It can be very exhausting for a family to have to go through. And that's every day, every meal. Food is, food is life. And so to think, oh, now I have to find a way to feed that, it needs to be recognized more. It's very a big part.
I I really, really appreciate like the way that you broke that down. And I think that the like 3 main takeaways that I like heard from you is one, that it's not your fault, right? That this can happen. You can end up navigating aversions regardless as to all of the tools in the world that you use. So it's not your fault. 2, that you deserve to have help navigating it through feeding therapy, through your providers, through additional resources. And then 3, that it's a season, right? That it won't be forever, that there is another side to the feeding aversions. And yes, I will say the same thing. My youngest was the little that we really struggled with feeding aversions with, and she eats everything under the sun. She eats a more varied diet than I do now. And so there is another side of it. And I will tack on to the end of that I can't recommend enough for the parent who's navigated that, parent or parents, to also see a therapist in the middle of it, at the end of it, if that's available to you, for like what this will do to your relationship with food and with yourself and with your family. So I can't recommend that enough.
Right.
To receive therapy and help navigating that. So with that, I would love to, if you could tell us kind of an overview of with the FPIES Foundation, what your guys' mission really is there and what you guys provide today.
Oh, wait a minute. I feel like I have a lot to, well, the, like, our main mission, obviously, like I said in the beginning, was that it's the same today as it was when we started, is providing resources and tools for the everyday. That remains at the heart and core of everything that we provide. Of course, as we've grown, because we are now in our 12th year, 11th year, that we've been able to branch and get into research and get into our into our registry and work with other with researchers, and provide education to medical professionals and be at conferences and do all those things, but the heart and core remains the support for families. And so, and by that, not just supporting them, but and allowing their voices to be heard. That, we want to provide what you need, but also to be able to give those families, the platform, the house to speak from, to say, these are the things that we dealt with, and these are the things that helped us. So this is something that could help somebody else. And to say, this is real. These are the things, rare but real. We run that line a lot too. Is that, these are the things that we deal with. Is anybody else going through them? So to compare notes, and so that to give that reassurance that, there's probably somebody else going through very similar things. We all feel like we're very alone and isolated, because our focus just goes, right into our kids. And then we start to, like you said, our own care, our own self of like, okay, wait, now who's supporting me? And so we don't want that to get lost, is that there's a need for the families to be supported, to be recognized, at the very least, to be recognized of what they go through. If there's something that we can provide from that recognition, then great. Then that's what we're continually doing, is what tool can we, okay, we've heard this, what can we develop? And like we're going through it ourselves. So we know we're in the trenches ourselves. We know the tools that we need. We have a ever running to-do list, and wish list of things that we're trying to create and do, and we can never do them fast enough. We are a 100% volunteer nonprofit, from the directors and on down and everywhere. So we do what we can, how we can, when we can. We utilize resources from where we can. So medical research students, other providers, other rare disease networks, other places that can have pieces that we can, pull from, borrow from, use, and then provide to the community. So we do all of that in ways that we can, so that we can have these resources for families and providers to be able to provide for families. So those are kind of big things that we do.
Those are enormous things. Those are very big things. On a more like granular scale, I will say that one, absolutely love the FPIES Foundation, and my favorite resources that I think our families use most often are definitely the ER letter and checklist and the toolkit around that, because as you mentioned, a lot of providers don't know what FPIES is, and so you have provided an entire toolkit for families to be able to arrive at an urgent care or an emergency room and be able to just provide that data and information right up front, to say like, this is what I'm navigating. It's not a tummy bug and I need you to take me seriously. And like,
Right.
that is a game changer. So that's one part of many resources that you guys offer that I absolutely love. The other is the provider directory. It's very common for families just to be like, I just need to meet someone who has ever heard of FPIES, and because that's hard.
Right.
And,
Right.
and so, and certainly disheartening as a parent when you go to a medical,
Yeah.
like I feel
Right.
confident that I'm dealing with FPIES based on X, Y, and Z, and you get told, no, that's not very likely. That's pretty rare. And so the provider
Right.
directs you,
Right.
and then you have a ton of resources on both sides, right? Like you said, you are absolutely on both sides of the door. You have the resources for the professionals, you have the resources for the families, and it's incredible. So thank you for the work that you do. And how can people support you in that work?
That's always a hard, tricky question, because the support that we need mostly people, we don't like to approach the community for it because we know everybody's busy, and that's the bottom line. But the community is where the heart of the matter is, to know where to help people. And so it can be, that it's just part of being a nonprofit volunteer foundation. But if and so I think people don't step forward. They want to volunteer, but they don't know where to step in. And what we like to say is, we'll take whatever you got. So we have, I mean, that's been where our a lot of our resources are built the best, is because somebody has a skill set and they see a need, and then let's do it. Let's go ahead and let's get this going. We have, like I said, we have an ever going wish list of things, but if we don't have the time or the resources to do that, then we have to keep it on the wish list until we have somebody who is versed in those kind of things, or we have the time to learn them. So we've had several volunteers put together some amazing things because it's their skill set, and we absolutely love that. So we will absolutely utilize people's skill set, and then it helps. There's been many people, and myself included, why we run this foundation is because it helps me to put something forward. So it helps me to be able to do something. When you can't feed your child, is there something I can do that would also help your child, or but help other people along the way? And so, absolutely, we will take those kind of things. And then, I mean, the second, and probably this is probably more first, I should have said first, is just to continue to be, this is amazing community. These families come alongside new families, and just hug them, and here's what you need, and here's how people can help, and here's, yeah, dump all this information, and sometimes, not dump, but just like, of love. That's what I mean, dump, pouring out the love of, like, you're not alone. And so just to continue to do that is, I mean, that is immeasurable, what the families do in the support groups and with each other, and keeping in contact, or however it is. There's the online, we don't moderate it, but the online one on Facebook and Baby Center. But the families that connect behind the scenes, and share phone numbers and texting, and or somebody who might be in the same city, but most time not. But they'll have meetups, and those things are so intensely invaluable, and not anything that necessarily comes from the foundation, but just that we recognize it, and it's such a high need. And so that is commendable, that the community has remained that for over a decade. I received it when I came into it, and it has stayed that way. There's families that just keep turn around, pulling everybody out of that hole, and it's so amazing.
Yep.
Great.
I appreciate that. I 100% agree. This community just blows me away with how incredibly strong, giving, caring they are. It's amazing. And that's the best way to put it, right? Is that those who are now out of the trenches, turning around and helping pull others out of the trench. And So continuing to do that work and then reaching out to you if they're interested in volunteering and kind of giving a recap of these are the things, these are my skill sets, you know, is there something that I can take off your to-do list type of style.
Right. If they wanted to volunteer, I'll add just one thing too, is never underestimate your ability to raise awareness. Just these little snippets, I cannot even count how many times people have been like, yeah, somebody mentioned to me, and then my sister's nieces, it not just keep raising awareness in any little way that you can. Raise awareness. It doesn't have to be with us, for us. It's for the community. It's for these kids, and that's what it's for. And that is the most valuable thing.
Joy, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure. As always, I love talking to you about your journey and how incredibly, one, obviously passionate you are about the space, but also I truly, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate how incredibly empathetic you are to how awful the situation can be. And that it's not a one size fits all, that it's different for every single journey, and that's okay. And so I really appreciate that wholeheartedly, and I'm sure listeners do too. So for anybody who is listening, Joy, is there any last words of wisdom, anything that we didn't hit on, or something that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I don't think so. I think I covered a lot. I probably talked too much. That's probably that's my biggest downfall, is I talk too much. But I am passionate about helping families, and so.
We appreciate it wholeheartedly. And on my side, what I'll say for any of our listeners is, wherever you are in your journey today, you're doing an amazing job. I'm so incredibly proud of you. My braw's off to you, and we will see you next time. Thank you again, Joy.